Namaste, dear friends, and a very warm welcome back to this course on Introduction to Indian Psychology. This week, we've been focusing on trying to understand the concept of self and identity in the Indic context. And within that, we looked at the theory of the Panchakosha and to see how the range of the being extends all the way from the Annamaya to the Anandamaya. In the previous session, we looked at how Sri Aurobindo talks of the spectrum of consciousness, and then he makes a vertical map of this based on the Puranic hierarchy of the different world orders, and then at the concentric levels of how we have the outer peripheral self and the subliminal selves within us, until we can reach all the way to the psychic being, which was a little bit of his innovation, where he says that the Atman in regular schools of psychology or regular schools of philosophy reflects the static being. And Sri Aurobindo brings in a bit of an innovation where he says that there is also an evolving aspect or a deputy of the Atman within the individuals that is going through life's experiences. So he talks of the triple transformation in this context, where the first step is that we become conscious of the psychic being and allow it to take charge of our lives. So that's the psychicization process. Then there is a complete surrender to the spiritual force to guide our lives, which is the spiritual transformation. And finally, he says that if ultimately we are made of spiritual stuff, of consciousness stuff, then how can we remind every single cells of our body that they have to be supramentalized? And that was the level of consciousness, which is like the link principle between the lower hemispheres of body, life and mind and the upper hemispheres of Satchid Ananda. So what Sri Aurobindo says in particular here is that the evolution cannot stop with the human being, because the human being is too full of imperfections and belongs primarily to the lower hemisphere. So he talks of the next species or the next beings manifesting, which would be the supramental or the supermind consciousness being manifested. And therefore, he talks of evolution going further up. So there's a concept of an involution and an evolution, which was slightly different from Darwin's approach to the concept of evolution. So with this backdrop, we will now look at the fact that once consciousness is manifested or we have come here as conscious beings, then what are the different states of consciousness that we find ourselves in? So today's lecture is really going to be on the states of consciousness and types of knowledge that we can have. So the source is going to be an introduction to the Mandukya Upanishad. And in fact, it's not just going to be an introduction. We are going to try and go through all the verses of the Mandukya Upanishads. And this is because it's a very short Upanishad. There are just 12 verses. So we'll try and see how we can appreciate this very short, terse text, but which is very, very powerful in terms of how it creates awareness about our states of consciousness and what the sound Om can do to it. So we will look at the symbol Om as a psychological map of the human psyche. The Mandukya Upanishad itself talks of the 4 layers or the 4 states of consciousness, that is waking, dreaming, deep sleep and the 4th or Turiya. And then in terms of epistemology, we look at 2 kinds of knowledge that are talked about in the Mundaka Upanishad. That's the Aparavidya and the Paravidya. This will be followed by the 4 kinds of knowledge that Sri Aurobindo talks about. And finally, we see that the goal in Indian psychology is not just about knowing about things, but it is about becoming the truth. So what is the Mandukya Upanishad? In short, it is the briefest of Upanishads because it has only 12 verses. The claim is that the Mandukya Upanishad alone is enough for liberation. This is given in the Muktika Upanishad. And the psychological shift is that it doesn't look at God in the clouds, but it looks at the subject, the observer, in the 4 specific conditions of existence itself, or the 4 states of our existence. And one of the most important verses there is this one, which says, Sarvam Hyetad Brahma Ayam Atma Brahma, Soyam Atma Chatushpat. Now, this Ayam Atma Brahma is part of the Mahavakyas. There are 4 Mahavakyas or great sentences in the Upanishads, and this is one of them. The first Mahavakya says, Aham Brahmasmi, I am that supreme consciousness, expanding self. The second one says, Tat Tvamasi, not just I am Brahman, but you are also that. The next one is Ayam Atma Brahma, this deepest truth in myself. This is also nothing but Brahma. And finally, Prajnanam Brahma, the knowledge of all of this is also Brahma. So I want to also mention at this point that there is going to be quite a lot of Sanskrit in this particular session. That's because we are going to be looking at the entire Mandukya Upanishad. And I think it's a good idea to get an introduction or get an initiation into these texts and try and cull out the psychological dimension within them. But what I'd like to also reassure you is that you are really not expected to memorize all of that. If you can do so, that would be the win-win situation and you will be the greater benefactor from that. But what is most important is that you understand the concepts that it is talking about. All right, so let's move ahead. So this is the first verse of the Mandukya Upanishad. And what I recommend you do is that if you especially know how to read the Devanagari, see if you can read along or maybe read after me so that you also get familiar with these words in your mouth. It's about getting familiar with the technical terms that Indian psychology deals with. And those who can't read the Devanagari, we also have it in the Roman letters, the transcriptions. So please feel free to try and join along with me. All right. So we'll go and I'll try and do it a bit slowly. Om ityetad aksharamidam sarvam tasyopavyakyanam bhutam bhavad bhavishyaditi sarvam omkara eva. Yat chanyat trikalatitam tadaptyonkara eva. So what is it saying? It says Om is this imperishable word. Om is the universe, and this is the exposition of Om, the past, the present, and the future. All that was, all that is, all that will be is Om. Likewise, all else that may exist beyond the bounds of time, that too is Om. Now this, if you just think of it, is a huge acknowledgement, or it's a very, very big realization around what a simple sound like Om is potentially capable of. I would just take a small digression here and share with you an understanding, that's my understanding, phonological understanding of why the Om could be regarded as such an important sound in our civilization. So Om consists of the A, U and Ma. A is the very first sound that the human vocal instrument can produce. U is the last one that it can formulate, and then is a sound that holds the sounds together. Now what happens if you have a thread and you want to give it its maximum ample vibration? Where will you pluck the string? In the center, right? Similarly, the A and the U represent the entire range of sounds that the human vocal instrument can produce. So when we go from so the O in the center is like as if you're plucking the central sound, which is the most neutral, ample vibration that is possible for this range to produce. And when that happens, then the whole universe almost starts vibrating and resonating with that sound. So this could be one way of understanding that the Om, in a sense, contains all the sounds of the universe, potentially. So moving on. So we're talking of the 4 states of consciousness, and that's a mantra that we've just seen a little earlier. So can we try saying that together? Sarvam hyetad Brahma, Ayam Atma Brahma, Soyam Atma Chatushpat. All this universe is the eternal Brahman. This self is the eternal Brahman. This self has 4 steps or 4 quarters. So what are these 4 states of consciousness or Chatushpat that it is talking about? So the first state that it talks about is Jagrat, or the waking state. Now read along with me. Jagarita sthano bahih prajnaha saptanga ekonavimshati mukhaha sthula bhuk Vaishwanarah Prathamah Padaha. So you'll notice that I'm doing Prathamah Padaha, and that's a kind of a sandhi, a sound combination when the visarga or the two dots are followed by a pa sound. Okay, but don't worry about that detail. Now, what does it say? He whose place is the wakefulness, who is wise of the outward, who has 7 limbs, to whom there are 19 doors, who feeleth and enjoyeth gross objects. Vaishwanara, the universal male or the universal man, he is the first. All right. So, what are these 19 doors, the 7 limbs? And Sri Aurobindo, this is his translation. So, he has a little more of the archaic English where he says, who feeleth and enjoyeth, which is not a very contemporary usage. But we took his translation because his translations are not just based on his understanding, but also his experiential knowledge of what these mantras are talking about. So, Vaishwanara, the universal male, or more particularly, the universal man, he is the first. So, what does it mean? So, the technical name of this state, the godhead associated with this is Vaishwanaraha, the universal man. And what is the field of operation of this being? It's the sthula, the gross material world. And what's the focus? Bahihi prajnaha. And it is outward turned consciousness. Next, we have the 7 limbs of Vaishwanara, the universal man, where the heavens are his head, the suns his eyes, the air his breath, the fire his heart, the water his stomach, the earth his feet, and space his body. Then they talk of 19 mouths of experience. What are these 19 mouths? So 5 jnanendriyas that we know, the senses of knowledge: eye, ear, nose, skin and tongue. What are the 5 karmendriyas? They are the organs of actions: hands, feet, speech, elimination and procreation. What are the 5 pranas? And then they're the vital breaths of energies that we've looked at the 5 pranas earlier. And then you have the 4 antahkarana, or the 4 inner instruments, which are the mind, intellect, ego and memory. And the psychological reality that this refers to is that in this state, we are consensus bound. We believe only what is physically measurable. And what's a critical insight? That in this state, we are slaves to the physical laws. We believe matter is the only reality because our instruments or the senses are tuned only to matter. So that was the Jagrat state. Now we move on to the Swapna, or the dreaming state. So, let's read it together again. Swapna sthanontah prajnaha saptanga ekonavimshati mukhaha pravivikta bhuk taijaso dvitiyah padaha. So, what does he say? He whose place is the dream, who is wise of the inward, who has 7 limbs, to whom there are 19 doors, who feeleth and enjoyeth subtle objects, Taijasa, the inhabitant in the luminous mind, he is the second. So what does this mean again? So in terms of the technical name, it is Taijasa, like the previous one was Vaishwanara. The dreaming state corresponds to Taijasa, or the luminous, brilliant state. And the field of operation is the Sukshma, the subtle. And this is the subtle psychic world. So you remember in Sri Aurobindo's concentric circles, there was the outer periphery, so the outer physical, the outer vital, the outer mental, and then there was the inner physical, or the subtle subliminal physical, subliminal vital and the subliminal mental. So this is operating at that level. And the focus is antah prajnaha. The first one was bahih prajna. This is antah prajna, inward turned consciousness. And what is the creative power? The mind withdraws from physical nerves and builds a universe using samskaras, its past impressions. These are all very important ideas, and I'll tell you why down the line. So what is the analogy? That in the Jagrat avastha, or in the Jagrat state, the sun lights the world. In Swapna, you are the sun. The self provides its own light. Your mind is both the creator and the spectator. This proves that consciousness is independent of the physical body. And this is an interesting neuroscientific fact, that the brain does not know the difference between what we are doing externally and what we are doing internally. And therefore, when you're sleeping and there's a tiger chasing you, you will have all those reactions, physiological reactions, as if there was a real tiger chasing you. And this also, in terms of psychology, is an area to tap into very consciously, because then we can do a lot of programming of our being in the subconscious or in the dream state itself. And not just in the dream state, but just if you sit and visualize very, very concretely something that you want to achieve, they see that the results are almost as effective as if you were doing that practice several times over. So very interesting parallels and facts that emerge. Now, looking at the psychological shift, we see that in the waking state, you are part of the world. In the dream state, the world is a part of you. And what is the psychological insight? This state proves that consciousness can experience reality without sensory input. And this is a very important fact. You remember in one of the lectures that we talked about the brain and whether it's the source of mind and consciousness, etc. We talked about Dr. Eben Alexander, who had a brain meningitis and was in coma for a whole week. There was no chance of his full recovery, but he did. And that was that although his brain had shut down in many senses from a very practical perspective, his consciousness was free of the brain and had its own set of very rich experiences. So, this way of looking at the Swapnavastha also is a way of understanding that the consciousness is not dependent on sensory input, because we have external senses, we also have internal senses. So the 19 external senses that were talked of earlier on with the Jagrat Avastha also exist in their subtle, and there are subtle internal senses. I'll just give you an example. So if I tell you close your eyes and think of a beautiful rose, can you see it? I'm sure that many of you can. But are you actually seeing a rose, and is there an input coming in through your senses? No. But there is enough content in the mind to recreate the rose, and you see it with your inner eye. All right, so that is related to this Swapnavastha. The third state is the Sushupti, and this is the deep sleep state. Can we try reading it together? Yatra supto na kanchana kamam kamayate, na kanchana swapnam pashyati, tat sushuptam. सुषुप्तस्थान एकीभूतः प्रज्ञानघन एवानन्दमयो ह्यानन्दभुक् चेतोमुखः प्राज्ञस्तृतीयः पादः. Moving on to the meaning or the translation. When one sleepeth and yearneth not with any desire, nor seeth any dream, that is the perfect slumber. He whose place is the perfect slumber, who has become oneness, who is wisdom gathered into itself, who is made of mere delight, who enjoyeth delight unrelated, to whom conscious mind is the door, Prajna, the Lord of wisdom, he is the third. So, while all of these are the Upanishadic sayings, I really invite you to start connecting to your own life and recognizing these different stages very distinctly within your life story. And to understand Sushupti further, we see that the technical name is Prajna. Can you remember the first two? So the first one was Vaishwanara Uttamam, and that corresponded to the Jagrat Avastha. The second one was Swapna Uttamam, and who was corresponding with that? Taijasa. So Taijasa corresponding to Swapna. Wonderful. And this is Prajna, is the knower, the seed intelligence. And what is the field of operation? It's the Karana or the causal world. When we are talking about, the exams, etc., you might not have to remember the verses, but you have to remember the concepts. And what are the concepts? We'll just revise them once altogether again. So, first one was the Vaishwanara, or the Jagrat Avastha is related to the Vaishwanara. And what is the body that it refers to? The gross body. The second one is the Swapnavastha, and who corresponds to that? The Taijasa. And what is the field of operation? The subliminal or the subtle one. And what is the field of operation for the third one, which is the Sushupti? Who is the corresponding being there? It is the Prajna. And what is the field of operation? It is the Karana or the causal world. Okay. Now, what is the state of being? Eki bhutaha, unified. All diversity of thought dissolves into a mass of consciousness. Prajnana ghanaha. And the example that is given is that it's like the honey from flowers. When the honey is made, you don't know which flowers they came from. So it becomes a cumulative carrier of experiences in that sense. Or you can't really differentiate there. And the experience is that of Ananda Bhog. It's an enjoyer of bliss. And the psychological paradox is here that we call it ignorance because we don't remember it. But Indian psychology, or IP, calls it wisdom because it is the closest we get to our unconditioned core every night. So when you say, for example, I slept so well, I didn't know anything, that knowing of nothing, in fact, is a form of knowledge itself. Otherwise, how would you know that you slept so well and that you don't remember anything there? So what is the fourth stage, or the stage of Turiya, the fourth, the beyond? So it says, Esha Sarveshwaraha, Esha Sarvajna, Eshontaryami, Esha Yonihi. I've done a little bit of the separation there. Sarvasya Prabhavapyayau hi bhutanam, Nantaf Prajna, na Bahish Prajnaha, no Bhayataf Prajna, na Prajnana Ghanam, na Prajnyam, na Prajnyam. So neither is it Prajnyam, neither is it Aprajnyam. So Adrishtam. So this is a long one. We'll have to break it up consciously and do it. So Adrishtam Avyavaharyam Agrahyam Alakshanam Achintyam Avyapadeshyam Eka Atma Pratyayasaram Prapanchopashamam Shantam Shivam Advaitam Chaturtham Manyante Sa Atma Sa Vijneyaha. So what is all of this saying? He says, this is the Almighty, Sarveshwaraha. This is the Omniscient, Sarvajnaha. This is the inner soul, Antaryami. This is the womb of the universe, Esha Yonihi. This is the birth and destruction of creatures, Sarvasya Prabhavapyayau hi bhutanam. He who is neither inward wise, Nanta Prajnaha, na Bahish Prajna, nor outward wise, nor both inward and outward, no Bhayataf Prajnaha, nor wisdom self-gathered, na Prajnana Ghanam, nor possessed of wisdom, na Prajnyam, and then nor unpossessed of wisdom, na Aprajnyam. He who is seen and incommunicable, Adrishtam, unseizable, Avyavaharyam, featureless, Agrahyam, alakshanam, and then unthinkable, Achintyam, the unnameable, Avyapadeshyam, whose essentiality is awareness of the self in its single existence, Ekatma Pratyayasaram, in whom all phenomena dissolve, Prapanchopashamam, who is calm, Shantam, who is good, Shivam, who is the one than whom there is no other, Advaitam, him they deem the fourth, Chaturtham Manyante. He is the self, Sa Atma. He is the object of knowledge, Savijneyaha. Alright, so I just tried to also connect the words for you here so that you know how they correspond. But take the time, if you want, pause it here, do a playback, try and see if you can also wit. And there are many texts today where you can actually break it up word by word and try and understand it. But again, my assurance to you is that don't be afraid of this. Understand the concepts, and because these are mantras, the more we can say them, they can also lead to direct experience. So it's worth just trying to pronounce them and feeling the beauty of the sounds of this language. So what is this Turiya, the fourth, the beyond? So definition is that it is not a state like the others, but the witness or the sakshi of all states. In terms of the negative description, it is neti neti. And that is what we saw in the previous mantra, where it says neither inward turn nor outward turn, neither conscious nor unconscious. And then it is positive reality, Shantam, peaceful, Shivam, auspicious, Advaitam, non-dual. And what's the analogy? It's like the cinema screen. The movie, waking, dream, sleep changes. But the screen is always there, unchanging and untouched. So the goal of yoga is to realize that I am that screen, not the flickering image of that movie. So moving on to the last few mantras, we have A, Uma, Om, and their effects on the four states. So now that we've understood the four states, there is an association of the different letters of the Omkara with those states. So what do they say? Soyamatma adhyaksharam onkara adhimatram. Pada matra matrascha pada akara ukara makara iti. So now this self, as to the imperishable word, is Om, and as to the letters, his parts are the letters and the letters are his parts, namely A, U, Ma. So the concept is that Om is not just a chant, it is a phonetic representation of the entire spectrum of consciousness. And this is fascinating because the connection between the human vocal instrument and the universe is that this is the only part with which you can reproduce all the sounds of the creation. And therefore, in a sense, all the sounds of the creation exist within that range from A to U. So it says here that the three sounds are A, U and M. The silent amatra that is there, the unmeasured silence that follows the chant. And then the purpose of chanting the Om is the whole being exercise that integrates the physical, subtle and causal selves. So what is it in the Jagarita Sthana? That's the Akara. So it says Jagarita Sthano Vaishwanaro Akaraha Prathama Matra. So that Vaishwanarokaraha is Vaishwanaraha Akaraha Prathama Matra. So the first sound is that the first letter is the Akara. And what does it allow us to do? So what I will do before I give you the answer here is I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath and just do the sound Ah. So Ah. Do it as freely as you can. And again observe, because this is really about getting into the connection between sound and the state of being. So when you do the Ah, I also invite you to observe and see what is the kind of hand movement you feel like doing to represent this sound. Because you see, every sound corresponds to a certain experience. So when you do the sound Ah, it will correspond to a certain physiological vibratory experience. And very typically, if you've done it, you will see that the Ah corresponds to a kind of an openness. There's an existential quality. So Sri Aurobindo says that the Ah represents absolute existence. Now, if you can do that truly freely, you will see that it brings in a certain kind of joy, it brings in a certain openness. Now, what happens therefore if you master the A? So here it says, Aaptehe adimatvat va apnoti havai sarvan kaman adishcha bhavati ya evam veda. Okay, so what is he saying? He says that because of the initiality and pervasiveness, he that knows him for such pervadeth and attaineth all his desires. He becomes the source, the first. Can you remember who has said that I am the first, I am the Akara? Yes, Sri Krishna in the Gita, he says of all the letters, I am the A. So the sound of the A and the vibration of the A has the potential of giving us the experience of containing everything within oneself. And if you contain everything within yourself, then where is the scope for any desires? And that's the very interesting psychological dimension of this particular mantra, where you realize that desire arises when there is an experience of a lack. If you are everything, and here what is giving us the experience of everything? Just the chanting of the sound Ah, as freely as you can. So if the Ah makes you feel that fullness of existence, then where is there any desire? Huh? So it's a fantastic mantra and what the Ah is capable of unleashing for us. Next, Swapnasthana. And which is the sound associated with it? The Ukara. So what does it say? Swapnasthanas taijasa ukaro dvitiya matra utkarshad ubhayatvadva utkarshati havai jnana santatim samanascha bhavati na asya abrahmavit kule bhavati ya evam veda. This is a huge claim. So what does it say? But maybe before I go into what it says, I invite you to again close your eyes and do the sound oo as freely as you can. So take a deep breath and make the sound oo. So oo. And as you do the sound oo, I would again invite you to try and see what kind of action you feel like doing with your hands. And you will see that the sound oo which you have to try and really formulate very clearly with your lips, not an ooh like that, but ooh. Really try and make your lips very pointed and hollow, and that will give you the amplitude of the ooh sound. We see that the ooh sound is a kind of sound that embraces everything in it on one side and also is a giver on the other side. Okay, so what does it say? It says, the dreamer, Taijasa, the inhabitant in luminous mind, he is U, the second letter, because of advance and centrality. He that knoweth him for such advanceth the bounds of his knowledge and riseth above difference. Nor of his seed is any born that knoweth not the eternal. I mean, this is a huge thing. The English is something that might, not make it so easy for you, but try and understand what is being said. So here what they are saying is that the very nature of the is that it is something that is utkarshati, it pulls you upwards. And it is because of that ubhayatvat, it also pulls you upward and it also opens up. So it says that it has a centrality to it. So what does it say? It says that one who can master the U will not have anyone born in their family who is not a Brahmavit. All right, this is a massive kind of a statement to make on a simple sound, and if it is simple at all. And what it also invites us to do is to possibly see if there is a scope to do research around this, because how can a sound clear up the subconscious at some level so that it's so clear and so full of love, because the sound ooh has a kind of an embracing sound in it, that it can literally clear up your subconscious of any kind of concept of limitation, diversity, and become all-embracing. The next one is Sushupta Sthana, and this is the Makara. So what is it? Sushupta Sthana Prajnyo Makaras Tritiya Matra Mitehe Apiterva Minotiha Va Idam Sarvam Apitischa Bhavati Ya Evam Veda. So what does it say? It says the sleeper, the Prajna, the Lord of wisdom, he is the Ma, the third letter. Because, and here I invite you to do the exercise once more just before we read that. So close your eyes, do the sound and see what is the movement you feel like doing. And then we see that because the movement of the is generally a centering, a quietening, a bringing things into an alignment. So because of that, it sort of measures out the space. It says, because of measure and finality, he that knoweth him for such measureth with himself the universe and becometh the departure into the eternal. So there is a kind of a withdrawal that happens for one who knows how to close down the vibratory patterns of his being. So the final stage, the Turiyam, is associated with the entire sound Om, because as we've seen with the previous three, they were A, U and M. So the Turiya has the entire sound. So what does it say? Amatrash chaturtho avyavaharyaha prapanchopashamaha shivaha advaita eva omkara atmaiva samvishatyatmanatmanam ya evam veda ya evam veda. So what does it say? That letterless is the fourth, the incommunicable, the end of phenomena, the good, the one, that whom there is no other. Thus is Om. And maybe we do a last Om together and then we can read what is there. So close your eyes and do an Om. So it says that he that knoweth is the self and entereth by his self into the self. He that knoweth, he that knoweth. So once we know who is the self, then one knows, basically. So what are the two kinds of epistemology that we talk about in Vedanta, especially in the Mundakopanishad? They talk of Vidya and Vidya being of two kinds, but basically the core principle is that knowledge is categorized by the source and the impact on the subject. So the framework says that it is derived from the Mundakopanishad, and there are two streams here, the Apara Vidya, which is the lower external, and the Para or the higher internal. And the key question is, does our knowledge merely inform us or does it transform us? And I just want to make a small diversion again, but it's an important point that if you want to, let's say, see a star which is far away, what would you do? You'll use a telescope. So if you're seeing the telescope, then you will get to see realities which your normal senses cannot capture. Now, if you have a more powerful telescope, you will get to see more of that reality. Did the telescope create those new things? No. The telescope only gave us access to existing reality. Therefore, where does all knowledge really exist? You will see that it actually exists already out there. Now, imagine that you have a very sophisticated telescope, but your mind is very disturbed. Will you get access to that knowledge? No. So therefore, in order for us to have a good understanding of the world, you need to have two kinds of instruments that are functioning optimally. One is the external instrument and the other is the internal instrument or the human instrument. Now, the important point here is that what created this external instrument? The human mind. So one question that was asked by the seers was that if the human mind can create an instrument that can give us access, is it possible to refine the human instrument to an extent that it will automatically get access or spontaneously get access to all the knowledge that exists out there? And then that leads to several questions that what is it that blocks us if we can't get it and how do we go about it? So this apara vidya is the knowledge of the external world and the para vidya is the knowledge of the internal world. And what is also fascinating here is that when they list out the contents of the apara, the first things that they say are the Vedas. So one would ask that how can the Vedas be part of the apara world? And that is because the Vedas are only a gateway to tell us about certain truths. But it's a very different thing to know about it and to know it for oneself. And this is a big distinction between apara vidya and para vidya. So what is apara vidya? The lower knowledge. It's the domain of the realm of nama and rupa, name and form. And what's the scope? So all secular sciences, logic, arts, and even the intellectual study of the Vedas, as I just mentioned, forms part of it. In terms of the nature, it is indirect and mediated knowledge. It requires an instrument, eyes, microscope, logic, etc. What's the limit for this? It is the knowledge about the object. It gives us power over the external world but leaves the knower unchanged. Psychological notes that a man can be a PhD in psychology, apara, but still have to be a slave of his anger. What about Paravidya, the higher knowledge? The domain is Akshara, the imperishable, the eternal. And the nature is that direct and immediate knowledge is achieved. It is known by identity, Tadatmya. And the method is not reading or thinking about it, but Yoga Pratyaksha, which means a yogic perception of that reality. What's the outcome? Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati. The knower of the Brahman becomes the Brahman. Just a comparison table for you. So we see that object in apara is the other world. In para, it's the self. The tool is the senses and the intellect. In para, it is the intuition and silence. In mode, it is a fragmented categorical approach, whereas in para, it is holistic, unified. In the results, it is external mastery. In Paravidya, it is internal liberation or moksha. Sri Aurobindo talks of 4 types of knowledge, and I will start from the 4th. So he says that the 4th kind of knowledge is separative knowledge by indirect contact, which is the ordinary knowledge. So he says this is the lowest, most external and intellectual form of knowledge. It relies on sense or instruments to know things at a distance, like we talked with the telescope. So an example could be the scientific knowledge, such as observing cells through the microscope existence, etc. The 3rd kind of knowledge is knowledge by separative direct contact. Here the observer looks at the object or the process as if from the outside with more separation than identification. It is direct but a detached observation. So an example here could be that in the case of introspection, one is observing one's own mental processes or thoughts as if one is watching a movie. So there is a direct contact, but still there is a certain degree of separatedness in that. What's the 2nd kind of knowledge that Sri Aurobindo talks about? He says it's knowledge by intimate direct contact. The consciousness is still close to the object with a greater sense of identification and separation. It is knowing by feeling, experiencing, or being intimately connected to the object. For example, when you're feeling love in the heart, in your emotional state, on knowing one's own inner feelings without needing any external proof. So if you're spontaneously happy for something, you don't need an external proof to justify why that happiness should be there. It's just an internal feel and you know that it is there. So this is the knowledge by intimate direct contact. And finally, he talks about knowledge by identity, which is the highest form. So this is the knowledge where the knower and the known are one. There is no separation. And knowledge arises from being the thing itself. So an example for this is that experiencing one's own existence directly without needing to think about it. A yogi who identifies with the divine and knowing the divine happens directly as if it was knowing themselves. So I'll take you back to the quantum lens experience. Imagine that you've put the quantum lens and you're looking at the world around you with that. If there is a tree, normally how would you know a tree? You would have to take it, cut it up, understand its different parts and then put it together to say, okay, I know this about the tree. But when you have a quantum lens, can you say that I stop here and the tree starts there? You see that the tree and you have a seamless continuity in consciousness. And therefore, how can you know the tree? You know the tree because you are the tree. And this is one way of explaining the whole phenomenon of knowledge by identity. So therefore, our Rishi Munis knew a lot of things, not because they had instruments and all, but because they had the techniques of directly connecting to the thing itself. And that gave them access to the inner workings of several things that are harder to discover from the outside. So how does one develop all of this? So one has to start cultivating the Sakshi Bhava or the witness stance. And what's the tool? It's to move from lower to the higher knowledge. One has to develop this ability to have a witness consciousness. The method is detaching the observer from the observed. So thoughts and emotion sensations, we become a good observer of all of this within ourselves. And what's the benefit? It creates pratyahara or the sensory withdrawal, allowing the mind to turn inwards towards the paravidya. So normally our senses are always drawing us externally and getting caught in this and that. But when that happens, when you're able to watch the senses run away or the horses run helter-skelter in the example of the chariot, you are not bound to go helter-skelter. You can stay absolutely in your poise, and that staying in the poise is the connection with the paravidya dimension of oneself. So what's the process of subjective research? There are three-step process of knowing that we've already encountered earlier, but I'll just repeat it for our own convenience. So there is Shravana or hearing, receiving truth from a teacher or a text. Then there is Manana, where you're digesting that information, you're thinking deeply, you're using logic to remove intellectual doubts. And then finally, what happens is we talk of Nididhyasana, which means contemplation and an experiential understanding. So it's a deep, constant meditation until the truth is directly experienced. We see that in modern education, we stop only at 1 and 2, but Indian psychology really requires us to go all the way to the end till the third one. And finally, what's the modern application of this, of all that we've seen? So in education and psychology, we see that we are a data-rich society, but we are very wisdom-poor in today's world. And therefore, the solution is that can we start introducing Paravidya concepts into the classroom? So I would highly encourage you to maybe start your classes with maybe just a 5-minute self-observation exercise. And I do it personally here at IIT, and I think that it's very, very beneficial and students are very open to it. So see if you can just allow them the time to reconnect to the Paravidya dimension of themselves. So teaching students to observe their own mental states. And the reflection here is that knowledge is not just a tool for the hand, but it is also a light for the soul. In terms of exercise, so what is an exercise that you can do for this? I would suggest that again you close your eyes and you imagine your mind as a movie screen, and you pass your day's activities till the time that you are sitting and listening to this lecture. And as you do that, I would like you to become more conscious of what are the processes, what are the factors that have led you to do whatever you did in the day to day. How sharply can you identify those? What are the emotions that you would have felt? Another is, how often were you able to be your authentic self? So try and see if you can capture all of that on that movie screen. And then whenever you're ready, you'll have to do this by pausing it here and then taking up the exercise. So, food for thought for you. Swami Vivekananda says that education is the manifestation of the perfection already in man. A glossary for you here. Some more words. Finally, the references. So I hope that you have got a decent understanding now of all the different dimensions related to the self. So the self, the spectrum of consciousness, the states of consciousness, and the ways of knowing. These approaches are very typically coming from an Indic lens perspective. So do play with them, do apply them, and see how they enrich your lives in different ways. And do the exercises, and feel free to share them on the discussion forum or when we meet over the live sessions. So until then, enjoy these discoveries.